Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca for my week in reading. Everything I currently am reading, everything I read this past week, and everything I'm looking forward to reading in the next week. If you have missed out, I posted my first vlog this last week in 2 parts, and I covered the previous 2 weekends, sort of long weekend, and extended it into the following weekend of my reading 2022 novella releases in sci-fi and fantasy or speculative fiction. And so I read and completed in that vlog January 15th by Rachel Swirsky, a near future sci-fi about universal basic income. Tread of Angels by Rebecca Roanhorse, a sort of, it is angel focused murder mystery in a afterlife, sort of populated by different strata of angels. Sisters of the Forsaken Stars, which is the second in a series about nuns in space. Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk, another kind of angel-y murder mystery in which we follow a warlock who is a private investigator in 1940s Chicago, and she is also a lesbian and trying to solve a serial ritualistic murder, and we go from there. And then the last one was What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, and it is gothic horror, very atmospheric, and wonderful vibes from T. Kingfisher as well. And then I did also listen to, on audio, Bishop's Opening by R.S.A. Garcia, which is a novella from Clarkesworld magazine. So those all were covered off already in my vlog, so if you want to hear me talk more about what I thought about them, check out the vlog. Then let's continue with another T. Kingfisher. I read the new one, House with Good Bones, and this is a modern set in North Carolina where we're following Samantha, as she's this 30-year-old woman who is an entomologist that mostly works at like archaeological sites, looking at the husks of dead insects there. And she was working on a dig when they found human bones, so now she's furloughed and everything's been put on hold. She's traveling back to her family home where her mother lives, her grandmother's house, to stay with her. And of course, as soon as she gets there, her mother's acting really strange. And I don't really want to talk about the plot any more than that. It is ostensibly like a haunted house type story, and it's so slow though. I have to say, this is the least horror-y of her horror books that I've read, and it was just the right vibe for me. But it's really atmospheric horror, and there's almost no violence in here. Very little violence, no real body horror. There is a ramp up toward the end to actual like disturbing imagery, but the whole story is this sense of unsettling and not being able to trust your own mind, more so than like actual disturbing scenes for most of it. So I think as a horror wimp, this was perfect level of horror for me. And I just love T. Kingfisher's writing because it's so much about the characters, and that's how it is here, where we have this Sam character who she's very distinct in that she's kind of snarky. She's this bug scientist. She's really outspoken as a person. She is in this sort of distance, concerned relationship with her mom at the start of this, because her mom is behaving so differently. She's really worried that, is this dementia? Is it Alzheimer's? And much like What Moves the Dead, that I just read, our perspective character, instead of giving us dread, we do get dread as the story goes on, but initially we get this immense, deep-seated concern from her. And I think that is so easy to connect with as the reader, where it's very empathetic. So I love that aspect of her character. I love that over the course of the story, and I don't want to get into any spoilers, of course, we do really see her in this sort of distance relationship with her mom. They're not estranged or anything, but it's clear they've drifted apart a bit. To over the progress of this, them really being on the same team about this weird thing that is happening. And I loved that. I love seeing that supportiveness grow over the story. And not just between her and her mom, but the side characters that Kingfisher introduces are so brilliant. They're so distinct. They're always kind of a little bit quirky, or they have something specific about them that really makes you connect to them. So she's a master at doing side characters who feel like they could have their own book written about them. They're just totally fully formed people in the story. And all the side characters are great. We have the most wonderful side character for me is this quirky lady who lives down the road and is a retired wildlife rehabber who has a domesticated vulture, Hermes. And Hermes is a wonderful little being who, he stands out as almost reminding me of the Wyvern from House in the Cerulean Sea. Like, he's that distinct of a character, even though he's very briefly a part of the story. So yeah, you will fall in love with Hermes the vulture, for sure. And then we also have a gardener who is constantly showing up, and obviously as a gardener, like, he knows a fair amount about bugs, and so Sam and him have that shared banter about all their nerding out about bugs. So I loved that she really allows that to shine in the story. So everything about this was great for me. This was another 5-star from T. Kingfisher. I have basically loved everything that I've read from her, and this one is definitely one of my tops, new favorites from her. It was horror, definitely, but it's my vibe of horror for sure, where it's more atmospheric, it's more purely unsettling. The weird stuff that's going on is truly really weird by the end, and that's a little how the Twisted Ones went, where it really pushed me to the limit for myself at the end of that one. This one, it goes fully unsettling, but it was not too much for me, thankfully. But yeah, this was just so great to follow. I do think maybe the one thing I would critique is that there's some pretty strong, like, negative handling, negative messaging around fatness. Not in that there's any fat phobia here in part of the book. Our main character is fat. She's openly fat. She's cool with that, everything. But her grandmother in the past really talked down to her about that. And so there's some of that on page. And that is not really explored in any way. It's part of the fear and the disturbing elements for her, because that's a button from her childhood to push, I would say. But there's not ever any, like, discussion of that deeper into her psyche. And she doesn't seem to have a negative connotation for that aspect of herself as an adult, but because of the emotions about that with her childhood, I think that's something that's brought up over and over again later on in the novel. And so we don't really have a problem with how it was executed necessarily, but I do feel like there could have been, like, more of a discussion of that, of her psychology around that, and why or how she has overcome that as an adult, if it was something that was treated really negatively for her as a kid. Similarly, her weirdness as a kid is not really discussed, but is at times something from her childhood that is a button for her, I think. So yeah, I think those two things where, you know, she maybe has some neurodiverse coding, clearly, because of that, because she was obsessed with bugs and very literal and very outspoken as a child. All those things that made her really feel awkward as a kid now are strengths for her, and that's not processed on the page. So yeah, I think those things could have had improvements, but they weren't really true negatives for me. This was just such a well executed book that I love just about everything about it. So yeah, that's it for House with Good Bones from T. Kingfisher, and super happy to have that done, because ironically I complained about that one coming in real early, and My Hold for Babel by R.F. Kuang just came in 2 weeks early. So my plans yet again have been totally thrown off. It's when I know I really need to read in print, so I didn't have the option to freeze my hold, unfortunately, before it came in, and so now it's waiting for me to get it. So yeah, that's gonna be now throwing off the next 2 weeks probably. But then I actually read one of my Japanese children's books. So this is my first book of Japanese words, an ABC rhyming book of Japanese language and culture by Michelle Haney Brown and illustrated by Aya Padrone. So you can't tell too much from the cover. These are interior art, but that was probably the best part for me. I love the style of this interior art, and it might not come across fully because it is very like watercolory, but it's beautiful. I love this interior art, definitely. Now, I don't know if I like this as a children's book so much because of some problems that you need some brains to work through, really. So you can see each page, we have like our little rhyme here, and so this one is, B is for Buta, a piggy so cute. She likes to dance and play her flute. So initially, the first couple pages, it took me a little bit to figure out that the word in Japanese and the English word that it was describing are both bolded. And some of the pages, that's harder to tell based on the artwork that's behind it, what's actually bolded. So it wasn't totally clear on every page what word we were getting. So that's not great design. The other thing is that every time we have the actual text here for that word, as well as the English written text, but we have both the hiragana and either kanji or katakana. And so those are two ways of writing the same thing. But in this, it doesn't really explain the difference of those. There is a little bit of explanation up front about pronunciation and what the different types of characters are, but it doesn't ever tell you that's the format that this is. So I wouldn't expect a child to have any clue that those are two different ways of saying the same thing. It also, even more confusingly, on certain pages, switches which order they're in. So on some pages, most of the pages, the katakana and hiragana is on top, and the kanji is on bottom, and some it flips that. So how in the world would a child know that, or someone who's not overly familiar with Japanese, or someone who's been looking at it a whole bunch like I have so far? So I think design-wise, there are some issues with this, but overall I liked it. I had fun in that several of the words were words I do already know. So it was nice to be able to look at that and then compare the hiragana I already know and the kanji for it. So I enjoyed it. It was a great little children's book. Other than that, one last book that I read this week on audio was Spear by Nicola Griffith. And this one is another 2022 release, but not quite a novella. It's just edging over into the novel category. It is currently on the long list for the Nebula Awards, I believe. And it is an Arthurian retelling. It is not one of these reimaginings that's brought up to date or completely redone. It's a straight up, like in the setting, fully formed Arthurian story about looking for the Grail. And we're from a side character, Paratia. Originally, she's just known as Girl. She doesn't have a name. She lives in a cave with her mom. And I don't want to talk anymore about that aspect of it, because I think that formation of who she is really important to the story and kind of getting to know her. And this is such a slow-paced book that it's really about the characters and the prose in the story that you have to be invested in to like it. The prose is gorgeous. It's really lovely prose, and I actually kind of wish I had been able to read it on or in print. I think I would have connected with it even more if it had been in print. Unfortunately, I'm in such a rush of trying to get through things for the Hugo Award nominations by the end of the month that I wanted to get this one in, since it's been kind of a buzzy title for that. And I did really like it, but like I said, I think I failed to emotionally connect with either the characters or the writing. And so that's the one holdback I have. as far as her journey, we see her go from this girl living in a cave to kind of being out on her own, and she actually starts living as a boy. And so people think she's like this sort of odd job individual. She travels around and gets jobs on farms, and sort of is having sapphic yearning feelings for the farm wives as she travels around. So we do very much learn she's a lesbian and sapphic character, has a very strong attraction to these lovely women around, and that carries on as a major element. I guess I'll throw a little spoilery section at the end. I'm one of those people who doesn't really think that gender, sexuality, or relationships are spoilers, but they're made clear later on, so I'll tag it as spoiler. But so this is just her ranging around doing that, and then slowly she has this spear. She becomes a horse girl, really. Like, she winds up having this immense relationship with her horse and learning to ride from her horse, basically. And so that everything she learns about riding and using the spear enables her to get in with kind of soldiers, and so she behaves differently and kind of stands out for that, and as a result catches the eye of Arcturus, or Arthurus, I can't remember how to say his name, but it's Arthur. Obviously, some of the names are slightly different than in the Arthurian legends, and some of them are exactly the same. So Guinevere is still Guinevere. And obviously Paratyr becomes engaged with the Arthurian court, and all of the people around that are big names, meets Nimue and finds out about this whole magic surrounding this group. And then they decide, sort of randomly, it's kind of out of left field for me, but Paratyr is just returning one day, and basically they're like, oh yeah, we're off on this journey to go find the Grail. It's very important. And that's toward the end of the book. So you know that's going to happen because it's the Arthurian legend, but it was like, really? We had basically no lead up to this. And then we find out the reasons for why. And that was new to me. I don't think I have heard a myth that gives that reason before. And that was really an interesting take on it. So I will not say any more about that. But overall, before I go to my couple little spoilers, I will say I loved the writing. It was really fantastic. I think it was a really inventive version of both an Arthurian retelling and that kind of trope story of girl lives as a boy. And I think that was just really fresh in terms of storytelling. In the style of the writing actually did remind me quite a bit of Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Just the kind of way that the feel of the style of the text in prose and the feel of the ranging and traveling around of these people, where you feel like they're always unsettled and constantly kind of moving on the move based on incremental small plans that they're going toward, even when they don't really know. So yeah, I think it had that vibe for me, and that's appropriate because it feels like a similar place setting. So I think that was really good. So on to my couple little minor spoileries. So again, these are to do with purely with like relationships. So number one is that Paratyr ends up in a sapphic relationship with Nimue, and kind of learning about magic together. I really liked their relationship. It was great. And then the other one is, this was fantastic. I loved throwing this in, but we kind of get a mention dropped briefly that makes it sound like Lancelot and Arthur are in a relationship. And that was like, oh, okay, interesting. And then we find out that in fact it's a polytriad. So Guinevere, Lancelot, and Arthur are all in a loving relationship together. So I just thought that was fantastic. I loved the take on it, and it's clearly not like wouldn't be widely acceptable, but they view their relationship as very healthy and loving, and it feels like a really casual way of throwing that in this type of world setting. So yeah, I really, really loved that those things were sort of thrown in and worked so well into what's basically a historical fantasy story. So yeah, I thought that was great. Well done. And I think that is it for my books from this past week that I read. The stuff I'm reading is many. So on audio, I replaced Spear with Siren Queen by Niveau. I just started that, barely into it. I progressed on Redwall. In fact, I'm down to the last section, so I kind of want to try to finish this one today. Need to finish up some stuff. I started People Change by Vivek Shraya. I am continuing to progress in my chunky Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And I started but have not progressed on Our Wives Under the Sea by Julie Armfield. And on ebook, I have The Thick and the Lean by Chana Porter to get through before it is actually released on April 18th. So I need to try and finish that this week. So that, I think, is all the books. We made it. In terms of other stuff going on, I really have very minimal because I already vlogged so much. I don't have a ton to talk about. I think I did finish one show. I was watching Nobody's Looking. It is a Brazilian, I think, show. So it's not English language. I'm watching it subbed on Netflix, and it's so great. So the premise is this angel is the first new angel that's been created in a while, and the angels have a very sort of aesthetic, like they all have red hair, white shirts with red ties, and it's really quirky. It reminds me a ton of the shows like Pushing Daisies, Dead Like Me, Wonder Falls. That vibe is exactly what this show is. But this angel is born and comes to learn the job with all the other angels and basically starts screwing things up. Like showing the angels that they can kind of maybe break the rules. And so things do kind of go off the rails. I will say, if you if you're not okay with like sex, there definitely is, both in the capacity that they're guardian angels and they're standing around people through their lives, and in them breaking taboos as angels. There's drugs and sex involved. Most of that is at the beginning of the show when they're kind of just like figuring out what rules can we break and are there consequences, that sort of thing. But as it goes along, it's much more about them sort of figuring out their condition as angels and connecting with the human condition, like realizing that they've been distant from humans for hundreds of years, and that they're always right there with the humans that they're guarding over, that sort of thing. So I loved this show, and it's clearly a first season of what's meant to be more. And I'm guessing maybe they didn't make more, or maybe it got delayed in making more. So I'm really hoping that it didn't get canceled and will actually continue at some point. This wasn't from too long ago. So I really, really enjoyed Nobody's Looking. Highly recommend that if that sounds at all intriguing to you. It's very funny and witty and insightful and irreverent, definitely. It's just my kind of show. So I think that's it. I didn't have a chance to read my TLSs this week. In fact, I got 2 more because we're still a little behind on them shipping them to me. So yeah, I think that's it for me today. I don't have any recommendations because I've been very behind on actually watching BookTube. I'm still catching up on everybody's Octafinals wrap-ups from BookTube Prize and really enjoying all of those. I'm so looking forward to the next round when I do actually jump in on judging. So that's been great. Yeah, that is it for me today, I think. Thank you all so much for watching. It is really raining. I doubt you can even see how bad it is. This came out of nowhere. My neighbor was literally just outside about less than a minute ago walking his dog because it was clear. Lenten fish fries are a huge deal here. There's even an app for finding the best ones. So we've got our fish fry. Woohoo. Ripley, are you hunting something up there? What is going on? heard a loud noise and it was her jumping up on top of the bookshelf. What are you looking for? Is there a bug? Probably a bug. What a good bug hunter. Protecting the whole house.